To some, this is routine. Consumers drink on average 2.25 billion cups of coffee every day. Annually, 8.8 billion kilograms of coffee are produced and traded worldwide. It's something that most Western citizens consume regularly, but how often do we think about where this massive amount of coffee comes from? Most global coffee originates from producers in developing nations. Some of the largest producers of coffee are Brazil, Vietnam, Indonesia, Colombia, and Ethiopia. They grow coffee on both large-scale plantations as well as small-scale subsistence farms. Coffee farming provides the livelihoods for tens of millions of people. As Pendergrass states, coffee has dominated and molded the economies and political structures of entire countries, making it one of the most significant industries in the entire world. In addition to being hugely influential on social well-being, it also has large impacts on natural ecosystems in producing countries. Modern coffee production is rooted in imperialism. Some of the first coffee plantations originated and sold their product within Ethiopia. Throughout the age of imperialism, coffee expanded as a colonial commodity, grown in imperial colonies, and then shipped back to European nations. On the one hand, it has facilitated large-scale modernization and industrialization, while on the other has led to the degradation of indigenous culture, overdependence on foreign markets, and the destruction of land. Our ever-expanding globalized economy has been founded upon the world's adoption of a neoliberalist economic agenda. Neoliberalism is characterized as the expansion of the free market and worldwide adoption of Adam Smith-style laissez-faire economics. Today, this translates into opening up trade markets, deregulating government policies on trading, and the privatization of products in order to bring about overall economic expansion. Go into any Starbucks, Coffee Bean, or Peet's Coffee and you can buy coffee beans originating from every continent that produces the product. While it has become incredibly easy to attain goods from all over the world, this advancement comes with its own set of consequences. With continual economic growth comes an inherent need to use the natural resources available to us. The constant cycle of production is what environmental justice scholars refer to as the treadmill of production. As stated by David Pello, the treadmill of production is a theory that refers to our constant need to produce in order to fuel our global economic system. In doing so, we continually use the resources available to us with no true end in sight, and as a result, we degrade the land at the expense of growth. Treadmill theories elaborate upon power dynamics between the global north and the global south, or developed and developing world. Coffee is consumed predominantly by countries in the global north and produced by countries in the global south. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, Finland drinks on average 12 kilograms of coffee per capita per year, making it the highest consumer of coffee in the world. Whereas countries like Vietnam, the second largest producer of coffee, only drink 1.2 kilograms of coffee per capita per year. Many developing nations where coffee is grown are disadvantaged in the global context of coffee production. Unequal distribution of wealth and competition with larger, more international producers decreases the benefits these countries receive from the industry. Tanzania is a characteristic example of a nation affected by this system of inequality. Tanzania's coffee industry, based in the northern Kilimanjaro and Meru regions of the country, was not very large and was used only as a stimulant recreationally. As coffee beans became more of a desired commodity in the global market, and Tanzania became connected to this global market through its colonizers, the coffee industry grew and changed. Today, Tanzania is not a main contributor to the coffee market. Starbucks, the world's largest buyer of coffee, only purchases 1% of its coffee from Tanzania. But Tanzania serves as an important example that shows the internal inequality that economic policies of globalization and neoliberalism can create. In Tanzania, coffee serves as a helpful tool to maintain a livelihood for 500,000 Tanzanians. However, it is not an equal system. As global coffee demand remains steady, Tanzania has attempted to establish itself as a contributing producer.
Tanzania's coffee market is dominated 90% by small-scale distributors who work through fair trade cooperative unions to sell the coffee at the export auction held in Kenya. Very few Tanzanians actually drink the coffee produced in their country. Therefore, there's a limited local market. As a result, small-scale coffee farmers throughout Tanzania are competing with the large-scale production that is dominant in neighboring Eastern African countries, such as Kenya and Ethiopia. This coincides with Emanuel Wallerstein's world systems theory, which explains how the global economy functions on the exploitation of developing nations. Therefore, Tanzanian farmers are disadvantaged in the world's economy. In most countries that produce coffee, expansion of market is attributed to neoliberalist economic rhetoric that advocates the increase of the global trade and the incorporation of foreign players within countries. Tanzania is an interesting case study because it has very recently adopted a free market economy. Because Tanzania is not a main contributor to the global coffee industry, it aims to establish itself within the economy. As a result, Tanzania has adopted some practices such as lax policies on pesticide usage, overuse of land, and poor processing factory working conditions. This exposure to environmental hazards and inequality experienced in Tanzania is actually very commonplace within developing countries. There are significant barriers to entry of this production because the process requires farmers to grow the coffee, process the beans, and pay for transportation to the coffee auction. A small-scale producer may only be able to grow the coffee and loses profit at the other levels of production. The principle of commensurate burdens and benefit, as coined by Peter S. Wenz, is not followed, as Tanzania is forced to compete with larger producers and does not receive the proportionate benefits from their production. Possible solutions to this lack of representation in market are said to be improved by the fair trade of coffee and tea. On one hand, these practices do allow small-scale farmers to have more profitable products by decreasing their transportation and processing costs. And although communication between farmers and the markets is expanded, the system is still problematic in that profits are indirect, no money is actually made until the coffee is sold at auction. The system involves a bureaucratic process that puts fair trade participants at a disadvantage when competing with larger scale production within Tanzania and throughout Eastern Africa. As mentioned earlier, because of their desire to compete within the global coffee market, Tanzania's coffee farmers have been influenced to partake in what a Western lens would deem as environmentally unsustainable land use practices that have greater implications on the health of farmers, land, soil, and cultural tradition. In order to keep up with the large-scale plantations, farmers have utilized pesticides that have left soils copper contaminated, in poor condition, and sometimes unusable. The lack of education and enforcement of sustainable processes within the Tanzanian coffee industry is negatively impacting the environment and those working within it. Nowadays, there is very little farmland available, and some citizens are resorting to utilization of protected savanna land to simply grow coffee and subsistence agricultural products. Old livelihoods suffer, and overall the quality of the land they are farming decreases severely. While macro growth is important to Tanzania's development, the adoption of the free market does not necessarily benefit the country's citizens equally on the micro scale. Tanzania is not alone in these general trends. Other developing countries have experienced a similar history as Tanzania at similar and larger degrees. Tanzania is just one case study within the global context, but it uncovers the problematic organization of coffee production within some developing nations.